racial tension. I reach out to you as a human being. Let us unite. Let us stop the fighting amongst each other. We know that Guyana has a problem during election time with the rivalry between Afro-Guyanese and Indo-Guyanese, and it needs to stop.
The racial tension comes as the Guyana Elections Commission is still to determine the winner of the March 2 general and regional elections.
Allow the leaders to work it out. Do not take things into your own hands. We need to come together as a people, always. We are here to support you, and we will continue to fight the racial tension that is happening in Guyana.
In an uproar divided racially, the politics of racial, the economic or racial also. After the emancipation of slavery in 1938, they brought the Indians to work at the plantation because the blacks wanted more money for the labor, and they brought in the Indians. And when they found out that the Indians were a good substitute because of, they could do the hard work and they were accustomed to farming and so on and so forth, they brought them in much more multitude than the blacks were there. So that caused an imbalance. And now that we got our independence, the blacks run the country for over 20-something years, 28 years to be exact. But in my opinion, I think they were fair. They allow the other races to compete economically. But now that the Indians are running the government, you find blacks have a hard time doing that. Plus, they don't have the background of producing goods and services. So all the commerce and economic entity of the country is controlled by the Indians.
There can always be hope because there are people still continuing to be educated. People are becoming much more aware and much more astute to their situation. So there has to be, because if you tell a Guyanese that there is no hope, you've just doomed their future. Mm-hmm. How do you tell a student who's at the University of Guyana that when you graduate, this is it for you? You just look outwards.
I read your dissertation. Yeah. You discuss one of the things that is being talked about in Guyana, and also to this extent in Trinidad. It's been a reality of some degree in Fiji, and that is the question of these competing forces, these competing parties. Rather than have them compete over government power, one winning and one staying in the opposition, that you have an arrangement where both parties sit in the executive arm of government, what they call power sharing.
The thing about power sharing is because you leave it at the level of government. And the Guyanese experience has taught me, if nothing else, that nobody's going to give up power to suit the needs of any other group. You have to, the situation is you have to fight for it. And it has to be fought for at the grassroots level. Politicians don't give up power. It's not one of the things, we, they, whoever you want to classify as politician, they're known for. So it has to be demanded at the level of people, of the citizenship, that has to demand for power sharing, but in a different way. Having executive power share is not going to solve the problem as far as not going to solve the problem, because you still have to deal with people. Mm-hmm. People and their personalities and their egos and their power tripping and their whatever. You have to have mechanisms in place from the grass. And I think one of the things you talk about, this sort of comprehensive power sharing where NGOs are involved, the level of civil society. You have to build trust in people. So for instance, you cannot have a situation where people go on strike because their basic level of living is demeaned, and then you get the police after them for expressing their democratic right.
And identify its impact in society, we must first understand racism and its various dimensions. Now, what is racism? Well, the Oxford Dictionary defines racism as prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against someone of a different race based on the belief that one's own race is superior. Now, there are multiple dimensions of racism. These are attitudinal racism, ideological racism, group racism, and institutional racism. Attitudinal racism refers to the discrimination of a group of people without proper justification. This, in respect to Guyanese, was due to inherited resentment that has been passed down from generations through family teachings of hostility towards specific groups of people by emphasizing past conflicts and hardships that was inflicted upon them by that group. Ideological racism relates to one's belief that a race is superior to other races. The last and arguably the most lethal form of racism prevalent in Guyana is institutional racism. This occurs when a sovereign state incorporates prejudice against a certain race within the judicial system, which encourages inequality. Now we will examine the historical background of racism within Guyana. Racism in Guyana was evident or developed from the system of slavery and indentureship. Slavery and indentureship are two intertwined terms that are synonymous with the roots of racial ideology within Guyana. This connection takes the structure of the plantation society and the exploitative nature of the Europeans into account. Firstly, in the case of the structure of the plantation society, the whites were in the minority. There was a pyramid-shaped population ratio in which the majority comprised of the slaves and laborers. The whites were indeed at the peak of the pyramid, therefore denoting supreme power, but disadvantaged in the case of numbers. This issue would have gotten worse with the arrival of the East Indian laborers in 1863. The workers were now in majority. If allowed, they could have easily overpowered their masters. This is where the exploitative nature is taken into consideration. The European masters were able to turn the two parties against each other to remain in absolute control. This led to the lasting rivalry on the plantation that perpetuated throughout the ages. Guyana has experienced extensive periods of violent racial conflicts that has continued to strengthen the ethnic segregation. The fires of division were fueled by a socialist leader, Lyndon Forbes Barnum, who encouraged social separation in order to gain political advantage against the opposition leader, Che Jagan. Following years of ethnic violence, Barnum seized power through voting fraud and exercised his socialist power to ensure he maintained absolute control. Barnum benefited from the change from the system of plurality to proportional representation and exploited a flawed electoral system to ensure he gained military and legislative advantage, and to also commence mental reconciliation by breaking cognitive barriers inherited from ancestral hate.